The first time I died, the sea smelled like pennies and cold iron. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't a slow fade under moonlight. It was a hard slap of wind, a railing slick with spray, and the tiny, stupid certainty that I had come too late. The storm lights on the breakwater blinked like indifferent eyes as the ferry pitched and groaned, and the folder in my backpack printed lab notes. Signatures, timestamps grew heavier with every breath I stole from the salt. I remember thinking, if I can just get this to the review board, they will have to listen. Then the deck lurched. A suitcase slid. Someone screamed my name, Iris, and the world turned into a white roar. Water climbed my throat like a hand. I tried to swallow air and took the sea instead. The second time I opened my eyes, a ceiling fan squeaked above a classroom that smelled of dry erase markers and warm plastic. Sunlight lay in bright stripes across the desks, as if nothing in the universe had ever gone wrong. My right hand held a pen, mid-scratch, hovering over a problem set titled Coastal Systems Design. Midterm Review. On the board, Professor Ree's neat block letters listed, Astrobay Challenge Application, due, Friday, 5 p.m. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard it bruised. I stared at the date in the corner of the handout, March 3, and the thin blue bracelet on my wrist, the one I'd lost in the storm. I turned it over, expecting the frayed end, the tiny burn mark. It was perfect, new as an untouched promise. The room swam. The fan clicked. A voice behind me said, bright as a bell, Iris Vale, you look like you've seen a ghost. Celine Voss sat 2 rows back, leaning her chair onto its rear legs like balance was her native language. She wore the same glossy smile I remembered from my ruined life, and at her throat, just visible beneath her collar, a teardrop pendant of pale glass caught the sun and threw it back in a cold, clean spark. The pendant wasn't magic. It wasn't cursed. It was worse. It was practical. In the first life, I'd learned too late that the glass drop hid an NFC token, paired to a stolen lab credential, a key disguised as jewelry. In the first life, I'd been flattered by Celine's attention, fooled by her late-night snacks, her "You're incredible, Iris. Can you teach me that?" In the first life, I'd shared my work like kindness was a law of nature. In the first life, she'd walked away with my invention and left me holding the accusation. In this life, I felt the shape of every coming blade before it swung. I didn't answer her. I looked down at my paper, at my own handwriting, familiar loops and sharp angles. The last thing I'd written in the first life before everything collapsed was an email draft titled, Evidence Packet Do Not Ignore. I'd never sent it. Now the universe had shoved me back to the moment before I ever pressed apply on the Astrobay Challenge, the national competition that promised patents, internships, and the kind of scholarship my family couldn't buy. The same competition that would, in 3 months, make my name trend for all the wrong reasons. I swallowed carefully. My throat didn't burn with salt. My lungs didn't ache. My palms were dry. I was alive. I was early. Professor Ree's lecture washed over me like a tide I could predict. In coastal environments, she said, you do not fight the water. You read it. You redirect it. You build with its moods. Her eyes swept the room, settling on me for a beat too long, as if she noticed my stillness. In the first life, she'd been my champion until the day the committee told her I'd cheated. After that, she'd looked at me with a grief that made my skin feel too tight. Iris, she'd said then, quietly, if there's something you need to tell me now. I'd told her the truth, and it had sounded like an excuse. Today, I met her gaze and nodded once. A promise made in silence. I will bring you proof before you ever have to choose. When class ended, the room erupted into the usual storm of zippers and laughter. Celine slid into the seat beside mine like we were already friends. You're applying for Astrobay, right? She asked, turning the question into an assumption. Her perfume was citrus and sugar, bright enough to sting. In the first life, that scent had clung to my memory like a sticky fingerprint, carried into hospital corridors, into quiet nights when I couldn't sleep, because I could hear strangers on the internet saying I'd ruined a fair world. Now it made my stomach twist. I'm considering it, I said. Of course you are, Celine laughed, and her teardrop pendant tapped once against her chest, a tiny sound like a drop hitting glass. I'm desperate. My situation is complicated, but if you're doing it, I feel like it's possible. You're like the lighthouse of this program. A compliment can be a net. I knew the weave. I stood, slinging my bag over my shoulder, and smiled at her the way you smile at someone trying to sell you a timeshare. "I've got office hours," I said. "Rain check." Celine's brows lifted, a fraction of surprise slipping through the polished charm. "Sure," she said, too quickly. "Anytime." "Hey, wanna grab iced tea later? My treat." In the first life, I'd taken that iced tea and been sick for 3 days, missing the preliminary lab lock-in where prototypes were secured and logged. In the first life, I'd thought it was stress. In the first life, she'd told everyone how worried she'd been about me. In this life, I said, "No thanks. I'm cutting sugar." Outside, Port Meridian's campus hummed with early spring. The Institute of Technology sat on a bluff above the bay, where cargo ships moved like slow thoughts, and gulls traced white commas in the sky. Down the hill, my parents' food cart sent up a thread of smoke from grilled fish and rice, the scent that had tethered me to home through every all-nighter. My mother, Mina, would pretend not to worry as she packed extra portions into my lunchbox. My father, Jules, would count cash with hands rough from nets, saying, "Brains like yours deserve a calm sea." In the first life, calm seas were a luxury. After my scandal, the cart had been vandalized, and my father's shoulders had bent under shame he didn't earn. The memory tightened my chest like a rope. I turned toward the engineering building, toward the labs where my future could still be stolen if I let it. Professor Ree's office was a narrow room stacked with journals and models of breakwaters. A ceramic whale sat on the window ledge, grinning. She looked up from her laptop as I knocked. "Iris," she said. "Warm. Come in. You're early." The phrase hit me like a wave. I arrived early. That was the whole point. I sat, careful. "I want to apply for Astrobay," I said. "But I also want to protect my work properly. I want to do everything by the book." Ree's expression softened into something like approval. "Good," she said. "Your design deserves that. What are you building this year?" In the first life, I'd told her too soon, trusting the wrong ears. This time, I chose my words like a welder chooses heat. "A coastal sensor network," I said. "But the novelty is in the calibration, how it learns saltwater drift without expensive hardware." Ree leaned forward. "Interesting. You'll need a data integrity plan. Lab notebooks, version control, access logs." She tapped her keyboard. "I can grant you a private repo on the Institute's secure server, and I'll assign a second faculty witness for your notebook signatures." My throat tightened, not with salt but with gratitude sharp enough to hurt. "Thank you," I managed. Ree's eyes narrowed, thoughtful. "Something on your mind?" she asked. I held her gaze. "I don't want surprises," I said. Ree nodded slowly, as if she understood more than I'd spoken. That afternoon, I walked to the basement lab where the Coastal Systems team kept its equipment. Small pressure sensors, drone shells, spools of marine-grade cable. The door required a badge tap. In the first life, Selene had found a way inside without one. I watched the reader blink green as my own badge registered. Then I lingered, pretending to check my bag. A student worker in a yellow vest wheeled a cart of batteries past me. The security camera above the door was angled slightly too far toward the hallway, leaving a blind wedge beside the frame. I noted it. Then I went inside and did the first thing I'd never done in my first life. I logged my entry, out loud, into my phone, speaking the date, time, and purpose, like an affidavit. It felt ridiculous. It also felt like armor. My prototype had a name in my head: TideLattice. It wasn't a single device. It was a pattern cheap sensors placed in a mesh that could infer complex currents the way a handful of notes can imply a song. In the first life, I'd built it because Port Meridian flooded every winter, because my parents' cart got soaked, because I was tired of watching poor neighborhoods take the brunt while glossy condos stayed dry behind private seawalls. TideLattice could predict surge pockets and help cities place barriers intelligently. That was why it mattered. That was why it had been worth stealing. I pulled a notebook from my bag and wrote the first line. March 3. Concept sketch for distributed drift-correcting sensor lattice. Then I signed my name with slow intention. By the end of the week, Celine tried her first hook. She appeared beside me in the library's engineering stacks, holding 2 coffees. "No sugar," she said, grinning, and offered me the left cup. I took it, lifted it, and inhaled. The scent was wrong, bitter under the coffee, a chemical edge. My stomach turned, but my face stayed smooth. "Thanks," I said, and set it down. I'll sip later. Caffeine hits me weird. Celine watched the cup like it had thoughts. Oh, she said, laugh a little too high. Same. She tucked hair behind her ear, and her pendant glinted. So, what are you doing for Astrobay? I'm still searching for a direction. It's embarrassing. Everyone else seems so ahead. She spoke with practiced vulnerability. In my first life, I'd fed that vulnerability with my plans. In this life, I fed it with harmless crumbs. I'm exploring coastal monitoring, I said. Nothing solid yet. Celine made a pout. You're lying, she teased. Your brain is never blank. I smiled. Then I'll surprise you. If Celine couldn't lure my idea out, she'd try to pull my materials. The lab's new private repository helped, but hardware still had to live somewhere. I started an unglamorous ritual. I photographed every sensor, every solder point, every serial number, and uploaded the images to an encrypted drive with automatic timestamps. I wrote my code in small commits with clear messages. Add drift compensation kernel. Implement salt temp correction curve. Fix packet loss at 3% threshold. I printed hashes and stapled them into my notebook, the way a baker might keep receipts. Noah Cade noticed first. He was a tall, quiet senior who worked in the campus archive, the kind of person who could find a missing paper in a room full of papers by listening to the silence around it. He caught me at the print station, gathering my stapled pages. That's thorough, he said, eyebrow lifted. I've been burned, I replied. He didn't laugh. He just nodded, as if burned was a category he understood. If you ever need a chain of custody template, he said, I have some. Then he walked away, leaving me with a strange warmth. In the first life, I'd had no one like Noah, someone who believed in systems more than charm. 2 weeks later, the campus announced an Astrobay pre-screen, a closed-door demonstration where teams would show a proof of concept to earn access to the institute's fabrication budget. In the first life, I'd missed it due to stomach flu. In this life, I arrived early, carrying my prototype in a foam-lined case. The demonstration room was full of noise and nerves. Posters lined the walls, glossy with diagrams. Professor Ree sat at the front with 2 other faculty members and a representative from the city's flood management office. Celine entered late, dramatic as a curtain, hair perfect, pendant shining. She didn't have a case. She had only a notebook and a smile. I'm supporting Iris, she said, loud enough for people to hear. I'm kind of her assistant. She's too humble to say it, but she's brilliant. A few heads turned toward me, impressed. The compliment had barbs. If I let her support me publicly, her later claim would sound plausible. I helped, so the idea is partly mine. I took a breath. Thanks, Celine, I said, equally loud. But I'm working solo this round. If you want to join later, we can talk about defined roles with Professor Ree present. Celine's smile froze for a heartbeat. Then she laughed. Of course, she said, like I'd told a joke. But her eyes hardened, a storm line on the horizon. My demonstration went well. TideLattice's sensors streamed data into a laptop, and the software showed predicted drift vectors overlaying a simple bay map. The city rep leaned forward. You're correcting for salt intrusion in real time? She asked. Within a margin, I said. With enough nodes, we get robust inference even if individual sensors are cheap. Professor Ree's expression was proud, careful. When I finished, the faculty asked practical questions: cost, durability, maintenance. I answered with the steadiness I'd earned in another life's panic. They approved my access to the fabrication budget. Celine clapped the loudest. On the way out, she looped her arm through mine. I'm so happy for you, she cooed. I knew you'd do amazing. You should celebrate. Come with me to the pier tonight? There's a lantern festival. You need to breathe. The pier, the lantern festival. In the first life, that night had been when my lab badge went missing from my coat pocket. I felt my pulse slow, settle. I can't, I said. I promised my mother I'd help at the cart, Celine pouted. Always duty, she sighed. You'll burn out. I smiled, sweet. Not if I pace myself. That evening, while I grilled fish beside my father, I watched the lanterns drift over the bay like floating embers. Families laughed. Tourists took photos. Celine would be out there somewhere, pretending she'd offered me joy. I wondered, briefly, what had made her this way. In the first life, I'd learned fragments. A scholarship she might lose, a mother who demanded trophies, a childhood spent moving from school to school. Pain doesn't excuse theft, but it can explain the shape of a person's hunger. My father handed a plate to a customer and said quietly, "You're thinking too hard." I startled. "Am I that obvious?" "To me," he said, wiping his hands. "Whatever it is, don't carry it alone. Your mother and I are not fragile." The words nearly cracked me. In the first life, I'd tried to protect them by hiding my shame. It had only made them powerless. "I won't," I promised. And for the first time, I meant it. On Monday, my badge wasn't missing. Instead, my lab locker was ajar, the hinge slightly scuffed. Nothing obvious was taken, but my gut turned cold. In the first life, I'd ignored small signs because I didn't want to seem paranoid. In this life, paranoia was just pattern recognition. I walked to the lab's security desk and asked, politely, for the access log for the weekend. The student worker blinked. "We don't usually—" "Professor Rhee authorized a data integrity plan," I said, and handed over the signed form she'd printed for me. The worker's posture changed. "Oh, right, give me a second." He pulled up the log. My badge had registered Saturday at 2:14 a.m. I had been asleep at home. My skin prickled. Someone had cloned my badge, or used an admin override under my name. Either way, it was earlier than in the first life. Celine wasn't waiting anymore. She was hunting. I printed the log, folded it, and walked straight to Noah Cade's archive office. He looked up from a stack of donation receipts, glasses perched low. "You look like someone stole your lunch," he said. "Worse," I replied, sliding the paper across his desk. Noah read, lips tightening. "That's not great," he said, understated. "Do you have video?" "The camera has a blind wedge," I said. I noticed it. Noah nodded once. "Okay, we can still build a timeline. Who would benefit from accessing your locker at 2 a.m.? His calm voice steadied me. "Someone who wants my prototype," I said, and felt the truth settle in the room like heavy fog. Noah leaned back. "Then we treat this like an archival investigation," he said. "Multiple sources, redundancy, no single point of failure." He opened a drawer and pulled out a template labeled Chain of Custody Evidence. "Fill this out every time you move the prototype," he said, "and stop using the same bag. Too easy to tamper with." I almost laughed, a sharp, relieved sound. "You're intense," I said. "I'm organized," Noah corrected. "There's a difference." For the next month, I became two people. The student everyone saw, polite, diligent, quietly ambitious, and the investigator no one saw, collecting proofs like shells on a beach. I bought tamper-evident seals and wrapped them around my case. I stored a decoy set of sensors in my locker cheap, uncalibrated, coded to fail gracefully. I moved my real prototype to a locked cabinet in Professor Rhee's office, accessible only with her key and my presence. I also did something that felt like stepping into sunlight. I told my parents enough to matter. "Someone is trying to take my project," I said one night at the cart, keeping my voice low. My mother's eyes sharpened. "Who?" "I don't know for sure," I admitted. "But I'm being careful." My father's jaw tightened. "Then we help," he said, as if the decision was simple. He bought a small safe for our apartment and installed a new lock. My mother started writing down every time someone from school came near our cart, every face, every plate they ordered. "Data," she said, tapping her notebook. "Like you." I wanted to cry and laugh at the same time. In the first life, I'd tried to be strong alone. In this life, I let strength be shared. Celine's tactics shifted when her easy charm failed. She started hovering near my lab station, asking leading questions in front of others. "So the drift correction is like neural net-based?" she'd say loud, and when I deflected, she'd sigh theatrically. "You're so secretive now. I miss when we were close." The implication was clear. I had changed, and therefore I was the suspicious one. I refused to bite. Instead, I adopted a bland smile and said, "I'm following the Institute's intellectual property guidelines. It protects everyone." People nodded, because rules feel safe. Celine's eyes would flash, and her pendant would sway like a tiny pendulum counting down. Once, she cornered me in the hallway outside the machine shop. "Why are you acting like I'm your enemy?" she hissed, the mask slipping. I'm not, I said. I'm acting like my work is valuable. She stared at me as if that was the same thing. The Astrobay Challenge required a final public demo on the city pier. Judged by industry sponsors and streamed online, it would be my stage and my risk. In the first life, Celine had timed her theft perfectly. 2 days before the demo, my codebase had been swapped with a corrupted version, and my prototype had arrived dead on the pier. Celine's team formed suddenly, miraculously had presented a polished version of TideLattice, under a different name. The crowd had cheered her. Then someone had discovered my corrupted code and accused me of sabotage, of hacking her project out of jealousy. The narrative had been irresistible. Hard-working girl versus bitter cheater. I had been destroyed in public before I could even speak. That was why I'd run to the review board with a folder in a storm. That was why I'd died. This time, I would not rely on being believed. I would make disbelief impossible. Noah helped me build a trap that wasn't violent, just inevitable. The Institute's secure server logged repository access, but those logs were usually buried. We wrote a script that mirrored key events file changes, badge taps near the lab door, cabinet openings recorded by a cheap sensor into a public, read-only ledger hosted by the campus archive. Noah called it the Harbor Ledger, because once, in the old days, ships had recorded their cargo in ledgers to prevent theft. You can falsify one record, he said, but falsifying 2 independent records is harder. Falsifying 3 is almost impossible without leaving fingerprints. We added a 4th, a tiny camera inside the prototype case, pointed at the foam insert. It would capture any hands that opened it, along with a timestamp. Is this legal? I asked, half joking. Noah's mouth twitched. On your own property? In your own case? Yes. In the lab? No. Keep it in your bag. I exhaled. You're like a cautious pirate, I said. I prefer archival professional, he replied, deadpan. The week before the pier demo, Celine made her boldest move yet. She sent me a long message at midnight. Iris, I'm sorry. I've been awful. I know you've been avoiding me. I'm scared. My scholarship is conditional. If I don't win Astrobay, I lose housing. My mom already told everyone back home that I'm going to be an innovator. I can't go back as a failure. Please, can we talk? No tricks. Just coffee. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. In the first life, my empathy had been her lever. In this life, empathy was still mine, but it would not be used against me. I replied, we can talk tomorrow at 2 p.m. in Professor Ree's office with her present. If you want to join the project, we will define roles in writing. Celine read the message seen at 12:04 and didn't respond. The silence was louder than any insult. 2 nights later, my phone buzzed with an alert from the Harbor Ledger. Prototype case open timestamp 2:11 a.m. location, off campus. My blood ran cold. The case was in the safe at home. I sat up, heart hammering, and listened. The apartment was quiet except for my father's soft snore in the next room and the distant sigh of waves. I crept to the living room. The safe door was open. The foam-lined case sat on the table. And beside it, a shape moved in the dim light. A gloved hand, holding a small device that flashed blue. For a split second, the glove froze, as if sensing my presence. Then the figure bolted toward the window. I lunged, grabbing the edge of a hoodie. Fabric tore. The figure shoved past me, knocking over a chair, and slipped out onto the fire escape. I chased, barefoot on cold metal. But by the time I reached the next landing, they were gone. In my palm, I held the torn piece of hoodie. A smear of glittery fabric paint caught the moonlight. It smelled faintly of citrus and sugar. My stomach twisted, but not with helplessness. With certainty, I went back inside, hands shaking, and opened the case fully. The prototype was there, intact. The decoy sensors were what the thief had handled because Noah and I had swapped them into the visible slots. The real nodes were hidden in a false compartment beneath the foam. The thief had touched only the bait. The camera inside the lid had captured their hands, their sleeve, the edge of a teardrop pendant swinging forward as they leaned in. A perfect glass drop, throwing cold light. My mother found me at the table, staring at the footage on my laptop. What happened? She whispered, seeing my face. My father stumbled in behind her, eyes wide. I didn't soften it. I showed them the clip. My father's hands curled into fists. We call the police, he said. Not yet, I said. voice steady despite the tremor. Not until we make sure it sticks. They'll say it's a misunderstanding, that it's a friend, that it's not proof. I need a full chain. My mother looked at the torn hoodie piece. Who is they? She asked, and there was steel under her words. Seleni Voss, I said, naming the storm. My father's face tightened. The girl who smiles too much, he said. He'd noticed. Of course he had. My mother took my hand. Then we do this right, she said. No more storms, no more running alone. The next morning, I went to campus before sunrise and found Professor Rhee in the lab. Coffee in hand, hair pulled back. I told her everything. Not the time travel, not the storm, but the facts. The log entries, the cloned badge, the break-in, the footage, the harbor ledger. Rhee watched the video twice without speaking. Then she exhaled slowly. Iris, she said, voice low. You've just described a serious breach. We escalate this. Yes, I said, but not in a way that lets it disappear quietly. Rhee studied me, and something like understanding flickered. You're afraid of a narrative, she said. Yes, I admitted. I'm afraid of being painted as the problem. Rhee nodded once. Then, we control the narrative with documentation, she said, and witnesses. She picked up her phone and made a call to the Institute's compliance office. This is Professor Rhee, she said, crisp. I need an immediate meeting regarding intellectual property theft and unauthorized entry. Yes, today. When she hung up, she looked at me. Whatever happens, she said. You did the right thing by bringing it to me now. The words hit me like sunlight breaking through cloud. I hadn't gotten them in my first life. Compliance moved with cautious speed. They interviewed me, collected the footage, requested server logs. Celine, apparently, was also interviewed. By afternoon, rumors buzzed through campus like flies. I kept my head down, did my lab work, answered questions politely without offering extra. Noah texted me updates from the archive side. Ledger entries copied to immutable storage. Hash verified. Backup off-site. He ended the last message with, breathe. I tried, but in the hallway, I felt eyes on me, curious, hungry. Someone whispered, drama. Someone else whispered, cheater, old patterns, ready to repeat. I reminded myself, this time, I have receipts. Receipts don't care about whispers. Selene confronted me that evening outside the engineering building, just as the sky turned pink over the bay. She stood under a street lamp, hair immaculate, eyes bright with something sharp. How dare you, she said, voice trembling not with fear, with rage. You're accusing me of breaking into your house? I'm not accusing, I said. I'm documenting. Celine's laugh was brittle. You're insane. You're obsessed. You think everyone wants your little project. The pendant at her throat flashed as she moved. I felt oddly calm. If no one wants it, I said, then no one would break into my home at 2 a.m. to touch it. Celine's lips parted, then pressed tight. You know what you're doing? She hissed. You're trying to ruin me before the demo. You're scared I'll beat you. I tilted my head. Celine, if you have your own project, present it. Win honestly. I won't stop you. Celine stepped closer. Her perfume hit me hard. You'll regret this, she whispered, then turned and walked away, heels clicking like a countdown. As she left, her pendant swung once, twice like a metronome, keeping time for a song only she could hear. The Institute didn't suspend Celine immediately. They said investigations take time, that accusations require due process. I understood, but my nerves still tightened. The peer demo was in 4 days. Celine still had access to campus. She still had friends, charm, and the ability to create stories. So Noah and I tightened our net. We moved my prototype into a sealed case with a unique lock. We set up a mirrored live stream from my laptop to an external server, so if anyone tampered with my presentation files, the change would be visible. We also arranged something simple but powerful. Witnesses. Professor Rhee assigned 2 graduate students to accompany me during setup at the pier. My parents insisted on coming too, bringing the cart as a celebration. If there's going to be a crowd, my mother said, let them smell grilled fish. Let them remember you're human. Noah showed up with a camera bag and a calm expression. I'm not officially part of this, he said, but I'm very good at standing nearby. I smiled at him, and for a moment the bay wind felt gentle. Demo day arrived with bright sun and the restless energy of a festival. The city pier was lined with booths, banners snapping in the breeze. Sponsors in crisp shirts handed out brochures. Students in matching team jackets huddled over laptops and prototypes. A stage stood near the end of the pier, flanked by big screens for the live stream. Above, gulls circled, crying like critics. My stomach fluttered, not with fear of failure, but with the memory of being destroyed here. I forced myself to breathe the present, the warmth of my mother's hand on my shoulder, the solid weight of my case, Noah's quiet presence to my left. "You've got this," my father murmured. "And if you don't," my mother added, "we still have fish." I laughed, surprised by how real the sound felt. Celine arrived with a team after all 3 students I recognized from other labs, faces tense. Their booth displayed a slick banner. Aqualoop. Smart coastal monitoring. The logo was a stylized teardrop. My stomach twisted, but I kept my face neutral. Aqualoop's prototype looked suspiciously like my concept cheap nodes. Mesh layout, but the casing was different, more polished. Celine stood in front, radiant, hands clasped as if in prayer. When her eyes met mine, she smiled like we were old friends. "Iris," she called, loud. "I'm so glad you made it. I was worried you'd be too stressed." The word was a needle. I nodded politely. "Good luck," I said. Celine's smile widened, triumphant. She thought the world was already leaning toward her. Setup began. Teams were assigned time slots. I checked my laptop, my connections, my sensor nodes. Everything was stable. Then, 10 minutes before my slot, a volunteer in a bright vest approached with a clipboard. "Iris Vale?" "Yes." "There's an issue with your registration," she said, frowning. "Your team name isn't in the system. We have an Iris Vale, though. Different badge number." My pulse spiked. In the first life, this was the moment I'd been locked out, flustered, made to look incompetent. Now I held out my printed confirmation and my institute ID. "I registered as a solo team," I said, calm. "Here's the email from Astro Bay staff." The volunteer blinked. "Oh." She scanned the page. "Okay, sorry. The system is weird today." Behind her, Celine's teammate drifted away quickly, pretending to check cables. Noah's gaze followed him, sharp. "Administrative sabotage." Noah murmured. "Low effort," I whispered back. "High impact if you panic." I didn't panic. When my slot began, I walked onto the stage with my case and my laptop. The crowd was a blur of faces and phones. The live stream camera's red light glowed. I set up quickly, hands steady. On the big screen, my title slide appeared. TideLattice. Distributed. Drift robust coastal sensing for flood prediction equity. I spoke into the mic, voice clear. "Port Meridian floods." I began. "Not evenly, not fairly. This system is designed to be cheap enough to deploy where budgets are tight, and smart enough to remain accurate even in harsh saltwater environments." I opened the case and held up a sensor node. It looked ordinary plastic. Screws. A small indicator light. "Ordinary is the point," I said. "We don't need miracles. We need patterns." I placed nodes along a map board and let them stream data. The screen filled with live vectors, the bay's current estimated in real time. The crowd murmured. The city rep in the front row leaned forward. I felt the rhythm of the presentation like a song I'd practiced in secret. Halfway through, the screen flickered. My laptop cursor froze for a heartbeat, then jumped. A notification flashed. Network connection changed. My stomach dropped. Someone was trying to hijack my stream. In the first life, I'd fumbled, clicked the wrong thing, and my code had vanished. In this life, Noah's mirrored livestream kicked in automatically. A second screen unannounced lit up beside the main one, showing the Harbor Ledger dashboard in real time. I hadn't planned to reveal it yet, but the universe or Celine had forced my hand. I took a breath, stepped closer to the mic. "If you're seeing this," I said, voice calm, "it means someone is interfering with my presentation files. That's okay. I prepared for it." A ripple ran through the crowd. Sponsor reps shifted. Professor Ree's posture tightened. Alert. I tapped my keyboard. The main slide recovered, but the ledger remained visible. It listed timestamps, file hashes, access events. I turned, facing the audience. "Engineering isn't just invention," I said. "It's integrity." So I built integrity into the process. I clicked on a ledger entry labeled Unscheduled Access Attempt Pure Wi-Fi, 10:41 a.m. The audience saw the IP address and device signature. Noah, at the side, held up his camera, capturing everything. This is a logged attempt to access my repository during my live demo, I said. It matches an earlier pattern of unauthorized access to my materials. I paused, letting the words land. In the crowd, Celine's smile faltered. I'm not here to accuse without evidence, I continued. So here is evidence. I clicked again. A video window opened on the big screen. A dim room, a foam-lined case, gloved hands leaning in. A teardrop pendant swung into view, catching light. The crowd inhaled as one. This footage was recorded inside my prototype case during an off-campus break-in, I said, voice steady though my hands trembled slightly. Time-stamped, hashed, and mirrored to the Institute archive. The compliance office has full copies. For a moment, the pier was silent except for gull cries. Then someone in the front row whispered, loud, "Is that Celine?" Celine's face turned a shade too pale. She laughed, sharp. "That's ridiculous," she called from her booth, voice forced. "Anyone can wear a pendant. This is staged." I turned toward her, meeting her eyes. "You're right," I said. "A pendant alone isn't proof of identity." I clicked another tab. That's why I have more. The ledger displayed the lab access log Saturday 2:14 a.m. under my name. This was a cloned credential event, I said. Here is the subsequent repository access trace, showing a device registered under SV-Guest logging into my private repo via a copied token. The token ID matches the hardware signature of a campus NFC device registered to... I paused. I didn't need to say her name. The compliance officer, standing near the stage now, did it for me. "Celine Voss," he said, voice carrying. "Step away from your booth and come with us." Chaos broke. Cameras swung toward Celine. Her teammates backed away like they'd been burned. Celine's mouth opened, closed. "No," she whispered, then louder. "No, this is a misunderstanding." She tried to smile again, but it cracked. "Iris, why are you doing this? We can talk." "We did talk," I said quietly into the mic. "In Professor Rhee's office. You chose not to." Celine's eyes darted, wild. She reached for her pendant as if it could anchor her, but her fingers shook. The compliance officer held out his hand. "Now," he said. Celine took one step back, then another, as if she might run. Then she saw the crowd, the live stream, the impossibility of escape, and her shoulders sagged. She handed over her badge, slowly, like surrender. A few people clapped uncertain, nervous applause. Others stared. My mother's hand gripped my arm so hard it hurt, grounding me in the real. My father's eyes shone with fierce pride. Noah's expression was calm, but his jaw was tight, like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. I finished my demo anyway. My voice wavered once, then steadied. "The point of TideLattice," I said, "is to make predictions accessible, not elitist. To build safety that doesn't depend on wealth. That's why I'm presenting it openly, with documentation, so it can't be buried or stolen." The sponsors asked questions, now more attentive than ever. The city rep asked about pilot deployment. A venture mentor asked about patent pathways. I answered, and with each answer, the ghost of my first life loosened its grip. When I stepped off stage, Professor Rhee hugged me, brief, professional, but unmistakably human. "You did exactly what an engineer should do," she murmured. "You protected the work and the truth." My throat tightened. "Thank you for believing me," I whispered. "I didn't have to believe," she replied. "You showed me." That evening, after the crowd thinned and the banners came down, I sat with Noah at the end of the pier. The water below was calm, reflecting the last orange of sunset. My parents packed up the cart nearby, chatting with a sponsor who'd insisted on buying extra fish. The city's flood management rep had asked for my email, and the institute had promised support. It should have felt like victory. Instead, I felt a quiet ache where rage had lived. "Do you feel bad?" Noah asked softly, eyes on the water. I thought about Celine's face when the story collapsed, about the hunger behind her charm, about the line between survival and cruelty. "I feel heavy," I admitted. "Like I just dropped an anchor." Noah nodded. "Anchors keep ships from drifting into rocks," he said. "They also keep them from sailing." You can lift it when you're ready. I let the metaphor settle. You're weirdly wise for an archivist, I said. Noah's mouth curved. We read a lot of endings, he replied. We start to recognize the shapes that lead there. Seleni's hearing happened 2 weeks later. She didn't confess in a dramatic speech. Real life isn't that tidy. She sat in a small room with neutral walls, eyes swollen from crying, and admitted to copying my token, to entering the lab, to attempting to duplicate my prototype. She insisted she hadn't meant to break into my home. I only wanted to confirm, she said, voice thin. I needed to know if you'd hidden something, because you changed, because you were hiding. The compliance officer's face remained blank. Professor Rees was sad. I listened without triumph. Why me? I asked Celine at the end, my voice softer than she deserved. Celine looked up, eyes raw. Because you shine, she whispered. And everyone told me the world only has room for one. For a heartbeat, I saw the younger Celine small, scared, taught that love is conditional. Then I remembered my mother crying over a score that wasn't mine, my father's bent shoulders, the cold sea. The world has room, I said, but not for lies. Celine flinched as if struck. The committee suspended her, revoked her lab access, and referred the break-in to city police. It wasn't dramatic. It was final. Afterward, Celine's mother tried to contact me. Emails, calls, a letter left at the cart. Mina handed it to me with a raised brow. Open it or don't, she said. But don't let it sit in your head. I opened it. The letter was a mess of blame and pleading. Celine had a fragile future. The Institute was overreacting. Could I please retract public statements? Could I please remember our girls' friendship? I read it once, then tore it in half. Not out of cruelty, out of clarity. Friendship isn't a shield for theft. Good, my father said when he saw the pieces. Paper can't drown you. Spring turned into early summer. My scholarship was secured. But more than that, my work was alive in the right hands. The city agreed to run a TideLattice pilot in 3 flood-prone neighborhoods, places where people had been ignored for years. When I visited the sites, I met families whose basements had filled with water every winter, kids who'd learned to lift furniture like it was normal. I listened, took notes, adjusted sensor placement. The project became less about a trophy and more about trust. People asked me, cautious, "Are you the girl from that live stream?" I'd nod, and they'd say, "Good." Someone finally stood up. Those words were a balm I hadn't expected. In the first life, people had stood on me. In this life, a few stood with me. Noah and I didn't become a dramatic romance. We became something steadier. He helped me file my patent documentation, making sure every figure had a reference. Every claim matched a timestamp. I helped him build a digital exhibit for the campus archive about ethical innovation, using TideLattice as a case study in integrity. Sometimes, late at night, we'd sit in the archive office with lukewarm tea and laugh about how thrilling our lives had become. Logs, seals, receipts. We're basically detectives, I'd say. We're basically librarians, Noah would correct. Then, on a quiet night in June, he walked me home and paused outside my building. The bay wind carried the smell of grilled fish from some distant cart. "You know," he said, eyes on mine, "most people would have broken after what you went through." I swallowed. Part of me wanted to tell him everything, the storm, the drowning, the impossible rewind. But I didn't need to. Not yet. "I did break," I said. "I just got a weird chance to put the pieces back differently." Noah nodded, as if he believed in weird chances. "Then keep choosing differently," he said. And for the first time, he reached out and took my hand. Gentle. Like a question, I answered by squeezing back. On the anniversary of the storm that had killed me in the first life, July 19, a date carved into my bones, I walked to the ferry terminal alone. The day was bright, the water calm, tourists chatting as they queued. In the first life, this had been when I'd sprinted onto the ferry with my evidence folder, ignoring the storm warnings because desperation makes you deaf. Today, there were no storm warnings. The sky was clear. Still, my pulse raced as if the sea remembered. I stood at the rail and watched the waves slap the pilings, small and harmless. My phone buzzed with a message from Professor Ree. "Pilot sensors reading stable. Proud of you." Another from my mother. "Come home. We saved you the crispy bits." And a third from Noah. "If you're at the water, look up." I looked up. On the far side of the bay, a flock of gulls wheeled in a loose spiral, sunlight flashing off their wings like scattered coins. Something in my chest loosened. The sea hadn't taken me this time. It didn't get to decide. I boarded the ferry anyway, not to chase proof, but to cross to the small island where the city stored old tide gauges, obsolete equipment Noah had convinced the archive to preserve. I sat by the window, hands folded, listening to the engine's steady hum. A child across the aisle pressed her forehead to the glass and giggled every time a wave sprayed the window. Her mother laughed, unafraid. I breathed in, tasting salt that didn't mean death. Halfway across, my phone chimed. A news alert about a heat wave, about rising sea levels, about cities that would need smarter defenses. I watched the shoreline drift, and I thought about the ledger I'd built about how truth can be engineered, how integrity can be designed like a seawall. In the first life, I'd believed fairness was a given. In this life, I knew fairness was built, maintained, fought for, like anything that mattered. When the ferry docked, I stepped onto the pier and felt the boards flex under my feet. The island air smelled of pine and salt. I walked up a path to the old tide gauge station, a small concrete building with peeling paint. Inside, rusted instruments sat like forgotten bones. Noah had told me there was an old analog ledger here, a book where technicians had once recorded readings by hand. I found it on a shelf, heavy, dust-coated. I opened it carefully. Rows of dates and numbers filled the pages in faded ink evidence of a world that had measured itself before everything went digital, before theft could happen with a copy and a tap. I traced a finger along a line from decades ago and felt a strange kinship with whoever had written it. They had believed in records. They had believed the future would need them. I smiled, closing the book. "You were right," I whispered to the empty room. "Records matter." Back in the city, the TideLattice pilot began to show results. The sensors predicted a surge pocket during a late summer storm, and the city placed temporary barriers in time. Basements stayed dry. A local news channel filmed an interview with me beside a row of sensor nodes half buried in sand. The reporter asked, "What motivated you to build this?" I glanced at the bay, at the horizon where storms could always form. I thought about my parents, about the cart, about Selene, about the version of me who had drowned clutching a folder. "I wanted people to have warnings they could trust," I said. "I wanted the future to be harder to steal." The reporter smiled. "That's a powerful line," she said. "Did you rehearse it?" I laughed, soft. "I've lived it," I said, and let the camera interpret that however it wanted. Selene disappeared from my daily life. Occasionally I heard rumors. She'd transferred, she'd appealed, she'd taken a job far from engineering. Once, months later, I received a short email from an unknown address. "I was wrong. I'm sorry. I don't ask forgiveness. Just keep building." There was no signature, but I recognized the pattern of her words dramatic. Spare. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to reply with something sharp. Another part remembered her confession. Everyone told me the world only has room for one. I finally typed, "The world has room for people who tell the truth. I hope you find yours." I hit send. Then I deleted the thread. Some doors don't need to stay open. In September, the Institute held an awards night for Astra Bay participants. The auditorium lights glowed warm, and the stage was decorated with paper waves. When my name was called for the Innovation and Impact Award, I walked up in a simple dress my mother had insisted on hemming herself. The trophy was a piece of glass, shaped like a wave, ironic, given everything. I held it, feeling its weight. In the audience, my parents beamed. Professor Rhee clapped with quiet pride. Noah watched with that calm expression that always made me feel anchored. I stepped to the microphone. The auditorium quieted. In the first life, my voice had been drowned out by accusations. In this life, people waited to hear me. "Thank you," I began, "but I want to say something that isn't on the brochure. Engineering isn't only about being clever. It's about being accountable. If you build a system that can be stolen, you build a system that can be weaponized. If you build a system that depends on trust without verification, you're asking the most vulnerable people to pay the price. So build with integrity. Build ledgers into your work. Build witnesses. Build fairness like you build seawalls. On purpose." I paused, letting the words settle like sand. "Also," I added, and a few laughs bubbled, "eat your mother's food when she offers. It's a kind of scholarship, too." My mother laughed the loudest, and my eyes stung. Later, outside the auditorium, Noah handed me a small envelope. "From the archive," he said. "Sort of." Inside was a photocopy of an old Tide Ledger page from the island station, framed by a neat label. Port Meridian Tide Record Evidence of Patterns. At the bottom, Noah had written in his precise handwriting, "If for Iris Vale, who learned to read water and people." I swallowed hard. "You're sentimental," I said, accusing him the way you accuse someone of kindness. Noah shrugged. "Archives are basically sentimental machines," he said. "They just pretend they're neutral." I laughed, and the sound felt like a door opening. That night, I walked home along the seawall. The city lights reflected in the bay, shimmering. Somewhere behind me, music drifted from a bar, and laughter rose like warm air. The world wasn't suddenly fair. Floods would still come. People would still lie. But I had learned something the first life never taught me. You can design for truth. You can build structures that make theft harder, that make manipulation cost more than honesty. And you can choose, over and over, to not run alone into storms for people who won't listen. I paused at a break in the seawall where you could see straight down to the rocks. Waves licked them gently. I imagined the version of me who had died here, clutching a folder. I let myself grieve her for a heartbeat. Then I let her go. "We're safe now," I whispered.